You're listening to The World at 8 with Lynn Mozart. The World at 8, the number one in nationalist news.
Highlights of the news today, Wednesday, the 1st of August. The government got it wrong again. Did they? Did they? Twins guilty of funding terror. Lack of funding may force Syrian refugees into Europe. It's not just the British, the Belgians do it too. Power down in India. Syrian Christians fearful of rebels. Thought for the day, an old problem and new thoughts. And finally, new hats for old, bring out your rag and bones. UK News. The government got it wrong again, did they? Did they? The Daily Mail headline screamed, "Polygamous immigrant families to be paid more benefits after government blunder," as the paper reports immigrants with more than one wife will qualify for extra benefits under reforms to Britain's welfare system, after an attempt to crack down on the problem backfired. Polygamous marriages are recognised in the UK if they take place in countries where the practice is legal. This means mainly Muslim countries. Currently the husband and first wife receive £111.45 per week, and additional wives receive close to £40. Under the universal credit system coming into force next year, polygamous marriages are not recognised and additional spouses will be eligible to claim up to £70 a week. Got it wrong, did they? I think not. Someone knew exactly what they were doing. Didn't they, Mr Cameron? Twins guilty of funding terror. Mohammed Shabir Ali and Mohammed Shafiq Ali, 25, face 14 years in jail after admitting they raised money to fund terrorism overseas. They have been remanded in custody awaiting sentencing. The two men, arrested in early April at London addresses, were originally charged with assisting another to commit acts of terrorism, which carried a maximum sentence of life imprisonment. The Solicitor General, Edward Garnier, accepted the brothers' plea to lesser charges, which carries a maximum sentence of 14 years. Euronews. Lack of funding may force Syrian refugees into Europe. The EU Observer reports that Andrew Harper from the Office of the United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees, UNHCR, basically the refugee agency, in Jordan told them Syria's neighbouring countries may seal off their borders if they can no longer absorb the increasing number of refugees. Harper explained refugees will be forced to return to Syria or go further afield to somewhere such as Europe. Although Jordanian authorities recently opened a new camp on the border that can accommodate over 100,000 refugees, Jordanian resources are now stretched to breaking point. Harper went on to say that although the EU is providing some money, they desperately need more as they are running out of money as they get it. With 1,500 refugees arriving daily in Jordan, it will not be long before Jordan will be forced to close its borders. It is not just Jordan. It is estimated 200,000 were forced to flee Aleppo over the weekend. These refugees will most likely head to Turkey, where there are currently 70,000 refugees in 8 camps, with another 2 camps planned to support 10,000 refugees each. Turkey will have almost 200,000 refugees that it has no hope of dealing with. As a response to the growing crisis about to engulf Turkey, Greece has moved an additional 1,800 border guards to the Turkish border. Frontex, the EU's border agency, says some 715 Syrian refugees were detected attempting to enter the EU in the first 3 months of 2012, a 5-fold increase compared to last year. Of those, the vast majority were crossing into Greece from Turkey. A World at 8 reporter commented, "And of course, with Turkey more or less in the EU, Europe will have to accept all their migrants." It is not just the British courts and local authorities who are insensitive to the concerns and fears of local communities when it comes to dealing with sexual predators. In Scotland they released the violent convicted rapist Robert Greens and rehomed him near the area where his offences occurred. It has emerged that the Belgians are planning to release Michel Martin into the care of a convent next door to a kindergarten. For those who do not remember, Michel helped Marc Dutroux kidnap 6 girls, the youngest of whom was 8 years old. Dutroux killed 2 of the girls and let 2 others starve to death. Michel has served over half of a 30-year sentence. Lawyers for 2 of the victims' families are planning to appeal the handling of Michel Martin's release hearing. Our thoughts and prayers are with the families once again, and World at 8 wish them every bit of luck in the world. After all, the Belgians are even more liberal than we Brits. Or is it weaker? World news. Indian power failure. Power has been restored in India following Tuesday's power failure. On Tuesday, India suffered the world's largest electrical blackout when 3 of the country's major power grids failed and over 670 million people were without power. Tuesday's failure came only a day after a major power failure on Monday and heightens concern over India's coalition government to manage the nation's infrastructure. Prakash Javadekar, spokesman for the opposition Bharatiya Janata Party, said it is a huge failure. It is a management failure as well as a failure of policy. It is policy paralysis in the power sector. Noted Indian historian Ramachandra Guha confirms the opinion that the power failure is evidence of government dysfunction and says India needs to stop strutting on the world stage like it's a great power and focus on its deep problems within. One of our World at 8 writers comments, the major political parties, the government, the mainstream media and the people of the UK could well do with a few lessons from Mr Guha, but it did give us a much needed break from the call centres at all hours of the day. Syrian Christians fearful of rebels. Syrian security forces have engaged rebels near 2 Christian areas in Damascus's old city in southern Syria, and fighting intensifies in the northern city of Aleppo. Christians throughout Syria are increasingly concerned that the rebels, with Western support, may topple President Assad. In Aleppo, Christians comprise between 8 and 10% of the city's population, and under the Assad government have enjoyed a great deal of freedom and tolerance, and they are fearful of the unknown. Antoine Odo, who is the Chaldean Christian bishop for all of Syria, has said, "People don't know what will come next. We are looking at what happened in Egypt, Libya and Iraq. We do not want to become like those countries. That fear is very present with us. That would mean the destruction of a Christian presence in Syria that has been here since the beginning of Christianity." World at 8, like Bishop Odo, is concerned over the fate of Christians in an increasingly fundamentalist Islamic state, and indeed the rest of the world. Why are the peoples of the West turning their back on Christ and supporting this false prophet? Because that is what Muhammad was, as in the Revelations. We really need to wake up and grow up about this problem, as it will not go away without a fight. Thought for the day. Now, the problems of warmongering, genocide and extremism are not new, and although I very rarely use another person's writing material, I'm going to start today's thought with this email I received this week. It is lucid, fair and true. Ignore any political or racial bias you may have and listen. This is a German's view on Islam. This is by far the best explanation of the Muslim terrorist situation I have ever read. His references to past history are accurate and clear, not long and easy to understand. The author of this email is Dr. Emmanuel Tanya, a well-known and well-respected psychiatrist. I quote, "A man whose family was German aristocracy prior to World War II and had owned a number of large industries and estates. When asked how many German people were true Nazis, the answer he gave can guide our attitude towards fanaticism. Very few people were true Nazis, he said, but many enjoyed the return of German pride, and many more were too busy to care. I was one of those who just thought the Nazis were a bunch of fools, so the majority just sat back and let it all happen. Then, before we knew it, they owned us, and we had lost control, and the end of the world had come. My family lost everything. I ended up in a concentration camp, and the Allies destroyed my factories. We are told again and again by experts and talking heads that Islam is the religion of peace and that the vast majority of Muslims just want to live in peace. Although this unqualified assertion may be true, it is entirely irrelevant. It is meaningless fluff, meant to make us feel better, and meant to somehow diminish the spectre of fanatics rampaging across the globe in the name of Islam. The fact is that the fanatics rule Islam at this moment in history. It is the fanatics who wage any one of the 50 shooting wars worldwide. It is the fanatics who systematically slaughter Christian or tribal groups throughout Africa and are gradually taking over the entire continent in an Islamic wave. It is the fanatics who bomb, behead, murder or honour kill. It is the fanatics who take over mosque after mosque. It is the fanatics who zealously spread the stoning and hanging of rape victims and homosexuals. It is the fanatics who teach their young to kill and to become suicide bombers. The hard, quantifiable fact is that the peaceful majority, the silent majority, is cowed and extraneous. Communist Russia was comprised of Russians who just wanted to live in peace, yet the Russian communists were responsible for the murder of about 20 million people. The peaceful majority were irrelevant. China's huge population was peaceful as well, but Chinese communists managed to kill a staggering 70 million people. The average Japanese individual prior to World War II was not a warmongering sadist, yet Japan murdered and slaughtered its way across Southeast Asia in an orgy of killing that included the systematic murder of 12 million Chinese civilians, most killed by sword, shovel and bayonet. And who can forget Rwanda, which collapsed into butchery? Could it not be said that the majority of Rwandans were peace-loving? History lessons are often incredibly simple and blunt, yet for all our powers of reason, we often miss the most basic and uncomplicated of points. Peace-loving Muslims have been made irrelevant by their silence. Peace-loving Muslims will become our enemy if they don't speak up, because like my friend from Germany, they will awaken one day and find that the fanatics own them and the end of their world will have begun. Peace-loving Germans, Japanese, Chinese, Russians, Rwandans, Serbs, Afghans, Iraqis, Palestinians, Somalis, Nigerians, Algerians and many more have died because the peaceful majority did not speak up until it was too late. As for us who watch it all unfold, we must pay attention to the only group that counts, the fanatics who threaten our way of life. Lastly, anyone who doubts that this issue is serious and just deletes this email without sending it on is contributing to the passiveness that allows the problems to expand. So extend yourself a bit and send this on and on and on. Let us hope that thousands worldwide read this and think about it and send it on before it's too late. Now Islamic prayers have been introduced into Toronto and other public schools in Ontario, and yes, in Ottawa too, while the Lord's Prayer was removed due to it being so offensive. The Islamic way may be peaceful for the time being in our country until the fanatics move in. And will we still be silent? End of quote. Now, whilst you may be shocked to learn that Islamic prayers have been introduced into Canadian schools, think about our schools, their immigrant Muslim intake and the effect it's having on their school curriculum. Very rarely is the Bible taught now, and the religious studies for Christian children is non-existent. Muslims and Sikhs are allowed religious headgear and jewellery, but we cannot wear a cross for fear of offending. Our children learn about peoples all over the world because most representatives as such are in class with them, but little is known about our own country or culture. It is wiped away with Marxist and liberal guilt because England actually went out a couple of centuries ago to spread civilization and, yes, to accumulate monies, with which this country then put to good use in building and creating places of education, work and culture. I personally think the English behaved abroad like any other foreign power, rather badly on occasion, but that does not mean that generations of our children have to be indoctrinated against their own people. Slavery? Bring it on. The Arabs and Africans have led in that discipline for centuries. Child slavery and sweatshops? Yeah. Now the Chinese and Far Eastern countries have that down to a fine art. Prostitution of both sexes, especially young children? Yep. Down to the Far East again, and in Africa they do it but do not pay for it. Gang culture and initiation rites? Oh goody. Chinese, Japanese and African this time, with a smattering of Eastern European in later times just to spice it up. Child marriages, sexual grooming, honour killings, well usually Arabia, India and Pakistan, and of course now in the UK. Which begs the question, why are the powers that be allowing vast numbers of people who have very different cultural ideas to us to virtually colonise us? You look down any council members, especially in the north of our country, and you will see a disproportionate number of Muslims, Indians and Sikhs actually on our local councils. They have also reached our parliament. No other country in the world would allow such a thing to happen, and yet we have. We have allowed vast numbers of these people to gather in communities and breed, and yes, to vote their own into power. These people do not come to this country to integrate, and this and successive governments must know it. To a non-nationalist person I would say, if you think that keeping out the British National Party is essential by voting in the local Muslim or ethnic candidate to stand on your council, then you are being led up the path, my friend. Who will look after your interests and those of your family? Mr. Khan? Nope. He'll be looking after his community, his mosque and his money. We are being fooled. The way other countries are being fooled into thinking these people want to make our lives easier, they do not. A telling picture was on the programme about winners and losers of the Olympics on ITV, and they showed a gymnasium in Leicester. Only one of the young boys training to be boxers was white. All the rest were Muslim. Peaceful? No. These lads are in training whilst ours are hanging around the streets. Our young men are ignored by the media and the governments. They do not want a fit and active band of young white men who they cannot call racist. Why do you think the armed services are being cut down? Why do you think the police are being hamstrung? Why do you think the GBP, General British Public, are given other things to think about? Bankers, Syria and the games? Because most people who have their minds on mainstream news are ignorant of all the big things that are happening around them. It could, however, be a more sinister picture. Have we ever thought that Belia and K-Moron had been hoisted with their own immigrant petard? Might it be possible they underestimated the power of these immigrants in the first place? Could it be they are just as worried as you and I? If not, and we might never know, it is a case of divide and conquer on a gigantic scale. And if one says anything against it, you are an Islamophobe, racist or just plain balmy. 'Cause they're peaceful, innit? Well, World at 8 says I must be all three, because I see it and I do not like what I see. I truly believe our message should be stop all immigration now. If you do not like our country, leave. Go back to your own country and make that how you like it, not our country. If you haven't enough mosques, go build them in Yemen. Operate halal slaughter in Libya, not London or Manchester. In short, go away. You are not welcome, any of you. You have your own vast countries to go back to them. I like England the way it used to be. Racist, humorous, unafraid, sexist, unfair, with poor and rich people and people in between, educated, not educated or simply stupid. Not dumbed down but with aspirations and ambitions, without celebs or footballers, with pubs instead of takeaways, with shops not the web, with high streets with English people walking them. That is what I like. And finally, in a final mind-blowing act of stupidity, the most iconic statues in London have been given new hats, apparently specially designed by some of Britain's top hat makers, including Philip Tracy and Stephen Jones. This ridiculous attempt to draw tourists comes under the Tracy and Jones new Hat Walk project, which, and I quote, aims to both celebrate London as the home for traditional millinery and draw attention to some of the capital's most iconic yet overlooked statues. Amongst them are the statues of Admiral Lord Nelson in Trafalgar Square and former US President Franklin D. Roosevelt, whose statue sits next to that of Winston Churchill on a bench in Bond Street. Lord Nelson's updated bicorn shows the British colours and a replica of the Olympic torch. This presenter says, I saw the Reuters video and almost cried with shame. Once again we have dumbed down our culture to appeal to a handful of Japanese tourists. The Nelson effort looks like he has a secondary penis stuck to his bonce, a really awful design job. Draw attention to some statues? Well, they'll get that all right. Who are these plonkers? I bet they made a mint with his latest piece of unnecessary designing for these poor 20 statues. This is a Boris Johnson initiative. I will say no more than God help my poor old London. You have been listening to The World at 8. I am Lynn Mozart and I wish you all a very good night. Universal credit system coming into force next year, polygamous marriages are not recognised and additional spouses will be eligible to claim up to £70 a week. Got it wrong, did they? I think not. Someone knew exactly what they were doing. Didn't they, Mr. Cameron? Twins guilty of funding terror. Mohammed Shabir Ali and Mohammed Shafiq Ali, 25, face 14 years in jail after admitting they raised money to fund terrorism overseas. They have been remanded.
You're listening to The World at 8 with Lynn Mozart. nationalist news.
Highlights of the news today, Wednesday, the 1st of August. The government got it wrong again. Did they? Twins guilty of fund government blunder, as the paper reports immigrants with more than one wife will qualify for extra benefits under reforms to Britain's welfare system, after an attempt to crack down on the problem backfired. Polygamous marriages are recognised in the UK if they take place in countries where the practice is legal. This means mainly Muslim countries. Currently, the husband and first wife receive £111.45 per week, and additional wives receive close to £40. Under the Ukraine terror, lack of funding may force Syrian refugees into Europe. It's not just the British, the Belgians do it too. Power down in India. Syrian Christians fearful of rebels. Thought for the day, an old problem and new thoughts. And finally, new hats for old, bring out your rag and bones. UK news. The government got it wrong again, did they? The Daily Mail headline screamed, "Polygamous immigrant families to be paid more benefits after custody awaiting sentencing." The two men arrested in early April at London addresses were originally charged with assisting another to commit acts of terrorism, which carried a maximum sentence of life imprisonment. The Solicitor General, Edward Garnier, accepted the brothers' plea to lesser charges, which carries a maximum sentence of 14 years. Euronews. Lack of funding may force Syrian refugees into Europe. The EU Observer reports that